Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening all. A very warm welcome to you all on behalf of the Sightsavers Equal World events team. We are very much looking forward to supporting you during today's webinar, Nothing Without Us, Why Young People with Disabilities Need a Say in Their Future at the Summit of the Future. We would like to open with a few housekeeping notes before we begin. We are delighted to offer Spanish interpretation for today's sessions. All of our presenters will be speaking in English today, but if you'd like to listen in Spanish, please click on the interpretation button on the Zoom menu and select the Spanish channel. And for the benefit of our Spanish speakers who've already joined us, para escuchar la versión española, se puede hacer clic en Interpretación en las opciones de la reunión de Zoom y seleccionar.
If you want to listen to the Spanish channel, you can click above.
And closed captioning in English for today's session. You'll see on the Zoom menu bar the closed caption button. Please click on this and show subtitles now if you'd like to view the captions, or hide subtitles to remove. Please note there's a few seconds delay with the captions as we've engaged live captioners for accuracy. So a big thank you to our captioners and interpreters for your support today. Please be aware this webinar is being recorded and will be available to watch and share via the Equal World website post-event. And we'd also like to encourage you to use social media channels to promote and engage a wide audience with this event. So please use the following hashtags and handles: Equal World, Youth 2030, and Global Goals. We'll be inviting questions throughout the webinar. Please add your questions via the Zoom Q&A feature on the Zoom menu. And please add the panelist name you would like to address your question to. We kindly ask that all questions and comments are accessible without jargon and use plain language. Thank you. And finally, the NYT events team are here to help you with any accessibility or technical difficulties. So please contact us by emailing admin@sightsavers.com. And I'm now delighted to hand over to our moderator to welcome you to today's session, Lydia Vlasma, Disability Rights Campaigner. Thank you. So over to you, Lydia.
Thank you, Debbie. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this online side event taking place during the ECOSOC Youth Forum in New York. Today, this event is titled Nothing Without Us, Why Young People with Disabilities Need a Say in Their Future at the Summit of the Future. And we are kindly sponsored here today by the Permanent Mission of Ghana and the Permanent Mission of the United Kingdom. The side event is organized by Sightsavers and their Equal World campaign, the stakeholder group of persons with disabilities, and the International Disability Alliance. And this event is also supported by the International Paralympic Committee, the We the 15 campaign, the UNESCO International Institute for Higher Education in Latin America and the Caribbean, the Major Group for Children and Young People, sorry, and the UN Foundation. So my name is Lydia Vlasma, and I'm a disability rights advocate from the Netherlands, also active as a youth committee member for European Disability Forum and International Disability Alliance. And as a chronically ill young woman myself, I'm also representing at the ECOSOC Youth Forum, the stakeholder group of persons with disabilities. And it's so wonderful that you're attending this side event today, whether you're joining from New York or from anywhere else in the world, because it's such an important time to be discussing the voices of young people with disabilities on this day of the Youth Forum that is focused on the Summit of the Future specifically. So this week so far, we've been hearing so much about why representation of young voices are crucial to having a Summit of the Future that includes all of our perspectives. And this side event is going to dive into why young people with disabilities in particular are super important to be engaged with whenever we are discussing the Pact for the Future. So what we're going to be doing today is we've got an exciting group of speakers who are going to unpack a couple of objectives for us. And the first is, how can we ensure that young people with disabilities in all their diversity are included in the Summit of the Future engagement? And the second objective is, What actions do these young people recommend to ensure that young people with disabilities are included in the Summit of the Future and beyond? So throughout this side event, it would be wonderful to hear from you as well. In case you have any questions or remarks, you can share them with us and the speakers through the Q&A box that is available in Zoom. And we'll put your questions to the panel forward to the speakers towards the end of this session. But first, to set the scene for us, we have two keynote speakers who are here to share their perspectives with us today. And the first is Dr. Philippe Pollier. And you might have seen Dr. Pollier at some of the side events or main events at the ECOSOC Youth Forum already this week. He is the Assistant Secretary General of Youth Affairs, and he assumed his mandate as the first ever Assistant Secretary General for Youth Affairs in December 2023 at the age of 32. So he's coming from Uruguay, and the youngest senior appointment in the history of the United Nations, and also the youngest serving member of the Secretary General's Senior Management Group. So as head of the United Nations Youth Office, Mr. Pollier leads system-wide collaboration, coordination, and accountability on youth affairs, overseeing the UN efforts to strengthen meaningful youth engagement in the areas of sustainable development, human rights, and peace and security. So unfortunately, he cannot join us live, but we are incredibly grateful that he sent through a recorded submission to be able to speak with us. So we'll be hearing from Philippe through video.
Dear friends, my name is Felipe Pollier, and it is a privilege to address you today during the ECOSOC Youth Forum as the first Assistant Secretary General for Youth Affairs. I want to thank Sightsavers, the stakeholder group of persons with disabilities, the International Disability Alliance, the International Paralympic Committee, UNESCO, the Mayor Group for Children and Young People, the UN Foundation, and the permanent missions of Ghana and the United Kingdom for hosting this space. I also want to appreciate all young leaders, your networks and organizations present here. Today and during this week around the ECOSOC Youth Forum, I have met young people in all their diversity. These exchanges have confirmed the importance of 2024 as a year paving the way to restore trust in multilateralism. With ongoing conflicts, rising geopolitical tensions, and increasing inequalities, we can't afford to lose hope. Instead, we need to be more ambitious than ever and ensure governments, the UN system, and all stakeholders are fit for purpose to achieve equality. Youth with disabilities must participate in a meaningful way in decision-making on climate change, on peace and security, on gender, innovation, on technology, among other topics that impact their lives and to which they can and should contribute. This is why this side event is so important. We must work together to ensure the outcomes of this forum inform the way governments and the UN address today's most pressing issues, including in the upcoming Summit of the Future. The summit is a crucial opportunity for member states to commit to concrete actions for meaningful youth engagement, disability inclusion, and gender equality. Chapter 4 from the Pact of the Future is focused on youth and future generations. The chapter and the entire pact must incorporate a disability, gender, and intersectional approach to open the space for young people in all their diversity, to be recognized as equal partners in decision-making. To achieve this, intergenerational equity and solidarity must be at the core of the pact. Proposals such as the development of a global standard for meaningful youth engagement with core guiding principles such as inclusion, diversity, accessibility, and transparency must be kept. This will address the risk of tokenism and youth washing. The chapter should also set a solid ground for increasing investments on youth, including funding for organizations and networks led by young persons with disabilities and those working on the ground. The chapter's concrete proposal for a global investment platform and the call for states, donors, and other stakeholders to support youth-led solutions are concrete steps in that direction. For it to be meaningful, youth engagement must be fully accessible and safe. Additionally, the Pact should also activate steps toward granting formal status and a stronger mandate to the ECOSOC Youth Forum to enhance youth throughout the Council's cycle. Lastly, the UN Youth Office is a strongly ally advocating for equality. The United Nations Youth Strategy, Youth 2030, and the UN Disability Inclusion Strategy are complementary tools that guide our work to ensure no young person is left behind. We will continue working together with youth networks, organizations of persons with disabilities, member states, and the UN system to promote meaningful youth engagement and disability inclusion in all we do. Muchas gracias.
Thank you to Dr. Pollier for his message to us. We look forward to engaging with him on the inclusion of youth with disabilities in the Summit of the Future, later in the plenary session as well. We now have our second keynote speaker, Husna Kukundakwe. She is born with a physical disability and a proud Paralympian. She's the youngest athlete at the Tokyo 2020 Paralympic Games and Uganda's youngest Paralympic flag bearer at the age of 14 years. At Tokyo 2020, Hosna became Uganda's only second ever Paralympic swimmer. And she's also a youth ambassador to the International Paralympic Committee and a Citibank Global Brand Ambassador. Husna strives to inspire many persons with disabilities and encourage them to engage with para sports. And we're so grateful that she's taking out the time for busy training schedule to speak here with us. So Husna, thank you so much for being here. It would be great if you could tell us a little bit about your own story and what your hopes for the future would hold for young people with disabilities.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for allowing me to be an inspiration, the inspiration that I am. And I'd like to reintroduce myself a little bit. I'm Husna Kukundakwe. I'm a para swimmer, a Paralympian, and I am also an IPC youth ambassador. I was born with a physical disability with 3 complete fingers and no lower right arm. And growing up, I always faced lots of challenges like discrimination, insecurity with my own self. As you can see in the picture, I would always like hide my hand, and so that people couldn't see it, I would always like wear long sweaters, long sleeve clothes to try and hide the fact that I was born with a disability. And this was always because people would point fingers at me, people would always whisper behind my back, and people would always in kindergarten they would laugh at me straight to my face. So that made me feel really, really insecure about myself. But when I joined sports, I started to prove the society wrong. When I joined swimming, I realized I had to take off all my clothes and show the rest of my body to the world. And I eventually became comfortable with showing people that, hey, look, I have 1 hand, I have 3 fingers. And I really didn't care anymore. And instead of taking pictures while hiding my hand, I would always raise it up to show people that I wouldn't be where I am without pushing through that barrier of disability stigma, and also my love for the sport fueled my journey as a para swimmer. All this wouldn't have been possible without the determination that I had to prove a teacher wrong, that I wouldn't be able to swim this race better than another person, or to be the best version of myself that I can be. With determination, I have taught myself to set goals, to reach out for things that I had never even imagined of ever reaching. At the age of 13, I went for my first ever, at the age of 14, I went for my first ever Paralympic Games, which I was the youngest. And that is an amazing goal. And honestly, I felt like I could touch the sky because I had reached to the top athlete level as a Paralympian. So with that, I always try to share my story. I inspire the younger generation to reach out for their dreams as soon as they can with the utmost determination. And so when I was invited to this summit, and the title being Why Young People with Disabilities Need a Say in Their Future, I was actually very, very intrigued because we, the youth in general, are the future of the world. And just knowing that people with disabilities are being included or need to be included in this movement to the future, I realized that I'm also part of it, and I definitely have a huge role to do, which is sharing my story of how I became a para swimmer, a city ambassador, and an International Paralympic Committee ambassador, which isn't quite seen here in Uganda, since people with disabilities are usually seen as classes or like are left out of society by people, are not included in activities, yet they do have the potential. In Uganda, you find a person with a disability on the street begging instead of actually trying to go for a job, because when they do try to go for the job, they are neglected. They aren't even given an opportunity to try out, which is actually what I strive to eradicate here in Uganda. And thankfully, in the past like 1 year, I have seen some changes. I've seen the increment of Ugandans in parasport and in para swimming as well. So I'm just very, very thankful for this opportunity to share my story with you guys in the least detail possible. So I started swimming when I was 3 years old. I used to hide my hand in a sweater. I used to always make sure that every time I would take a picture, I'd either turn away from the camera or fold this up like that, as you saw in the photos. And when I did join swimming, it raised my confidence, my self-esteem in believing that I am way better, more confident in what I'm doing and in the way I uphold myself. So later on, when I joined para swimming at the age of 10, I started going for international meets, for international conferences like this one, where I got to share my story, where I got to share what it's like growing up with a disability in Uganda. And I managed to go for my first Paralympics at the age of 13 and at the age of 14 and being the youngest there. And also going for the IPC Athletes Forum, where I got to be an athlete representative from Uganda, which also made me the youngest at that event. So my major focus in my inspirational messages is reach out for your dreams, chase for them as soon as you can, with all the passion and might that you have. And also, when I am training in Uganda, I train alongside able-bodied swimmers, which is also such, I guess, a step behind in the inclusion of people with disabilities in Uganda, which is a very, very huge challenge for myself. And I guess when even people without disabilities see me swimming the way I do and me beating them in races, it is also an inspiration for them to work harder and also be the best or better version of themselves. And also other people with disabilities around the world, other para swimmers, other younger para swimmers, to also reach out for their dreams as soon as they can, whenever they can. So yeah.
Thank you, Hosna, for sharing your story. And I think what you mentioned about learning to accept your own disability and the photos that you showed with that as well is so illustrative for the bigger picture of growing to accept disabilities as a society that is the sort of task at hand, I think, that we're in right now. So thank you so much for that powerful contribution. We are now turning to our panel speakers, and I'll introduce each of the panel speakers and then pass them the floor individually. So we are first starting off with Tapiwa Mutsikira, who is a 21-year-old resident of Budiriro in Harare, and he's a global youth champion for Sight Savers Equal World campaign. So Tapiwa was born with cerebral palsy, and he has represented Zimbabwe at the Special Olympics, where he was a gold medalist in the 1500 meters in 2019. And outside of competing individually, he is also a passionate advocate for the rights of individuals with disability, particularly through sport and fitness. He is a volunteer with the Disabled Women's Support Organization and a fitness trainer in his community, where he trains other young people with disabilities to help them reach their goals. Tapiwa is driven by a motivation to bring people together to create a more inclusive and equal world. And due to a public holiday in Zimbabwe, Tapiwa is unable to join us live here today. However, I caught up with him last week to ask him a few questions. So this is a pre-recording we will just share with you now. Welcome to Tapiwa. Can you please tell us where you're joining us from today and a little bit about yourself?
My name is Tapiwa Mutsikira from Zimbabwe, Harare. I'm joining you in Sight Savers in Zimbabwe, Harare. I live with intellectual disability. I was in special class since Form 1 up to Form 4 at Mfakos High 1 in Harare, in small ghetto. It's a ghetto. And I do sports athletics. 2019, I was in World Games in Abu Dhabi. I take gold medal in 1.5 meters. Then 2020, I was elected to be Sportsman of the Year with a disability all over Zimbabwe. Then last year, I opened a fitness gym in my community. I help those patients with disability and patients without disability in my community, training them through fitness and just giving back to the community. And also, I'm a physiotherapist. I do physiotherapist in my community, just helping the community. Yeah.
Wow, that's really impressive. And can you tell us a little bit about your work with fellow youths with disabilities and those without disabilities?
My trainings, I'm teaching them life skills, especially for those patients with the disability. Sometimes they don't go to school or they can't afford the school fees. So I'm teaching them life skills, agriculture, through sports, and something in terms of they want to do in their life. That's the things I'm doing. I'm working with those patients with the disability and also without disability. Also, I'm teaching them life skills. The things we want to remove the word discriminating, but to bring the word unified oral. That's the things I'm doing in my work.
And I can imagine that they have the opportunity to learn a lot from each other as well, right?
Yes, they are learning so much and they're giving each other the opportunities.
And why do you think it's important that global decision makers listen to the voices of young people with disabilities?
Thank you for coming to start. It's important. Why? Just because we are talking about inclusive, they have to involve in everything they are doing. If you are doing the meetings, please, you have to bring those persons with a disability, because we need a sign language desk or a disability desk for those persons. They have to advocate for us in their global meetings. Yeah, that's the thing is very important. But
And do you have ideas on what is necessary to make that possible?
yeah, let's just spread the word inclusion, and we have to change our minds and to say, give us the opportunity to show the world we can do it with our disability. Our disability is our motivation, no matter what. Yes, sometimes I know we face some obstacles, things, some painful things, especially with the disability, but sometimes don't allow those things to define us. All we need, we have to remove ourselves in the charity mode, but to work from ourselves. That's the thing is very important.
Yeah, thank you so much. One final question. The title of this side event is Nothing Without Us. Can you elaborate a little bit on what that phrase means to you?
Okay, nothing without us is meaning in everything you are doing, you have to include us and giving us the chance to show the world we can do it no matter what. Without us, nothing we can do. You have to do anything we are doing, you have to include us, involve us, no matter what. besides in the community or whatever, including us. That's the thing. Nothing for us without us.
Thank you so much, Tapiwa, for your inspiring talk, and great that you could join us. Yeah, so we're continuing to our next panel speaker. And our next panelist is Mulenzi Tony. Mulenzi is a disability inclusive youth researcher at the Makerere University Child Health and Development Center. And he contributes to the Disability Inclusive Families Project, striving to improve support systems for children with disabilities in Uganda at the Disability Inclusive Youth Program. And Mulenzi is also the founder of the Mulenzi Modern Goat Farm, empowering household income through sustainable goat farming. He also leads Love for Immigrants, which is a social space for immigrants and refugees, support through art, storytelling, and sign language. Mulenzi envisions a world where youth with disabilities are respected and valued, promoting dignity and solidarity among communities. So Mulenzi, over to you.
Good morning, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to people in different places. I'm happy to be here. I will share my presentation. I know I'll be somehow slow because I'm using sign language. Be patient with me. Thank you so much. My name is Mulenzi Tony. I work as a disability inclusive youth researcher in Makerere University Child Health and Development Center. As Nadia told me, as I'm a team lead for Love for Immigrants, which supports people through art, storytelling, and sign language. Love for Immigrants is fighting to stop the negative narratives about migrants. Even me, my grandfather is a Rwandan. Before Uganda got independence, there were some challenges from negative narratives. So Love for Immigrants wants to stop this. So we have been doing different things I am involved in disability inclusive parenting programs, and this program wants to see that children with disabilities are involved in right parenting methods. Many parents don't know how to care for their children. Many parents of deaf children, they only wait for a child to reach 6 years and then they put that child in school. And many parents don't know sign language. And these parents don't know how to care for their children. So we are working so hard to change these parenting systems in Uganda. We have a national parenting manual, and we want to see how to adapt this for people with disabilities. I'm also a disability inclusive researcher where we do peer-to-peer. And you see here, Rebecca interpreting for me. She never went to school to learn sign language. But with our program, we tried so hard to teach her sign language. And many organizations never believe that people with disabilities can do research. We are a testimony, and we've been doing this in different places. We have about 14 youth with disabilities working on research, and each youth has a pair. If you are blind, they give you a if you're using sign language, they give you a peer who can use sign language and support you. I'm also a founder of Mulenzi Modern Goat Farm, which improves household income through goat farming. You know, many youth with disabilities are not involved in agriculture because some have negative attitudes for agriculture, and our systems is trying so hard to solve this. My goat farm received funds from site savers through Tony Elmel Foundation. This is a good program, and I hope that we can get more funding from other programs to see that people with disabilities are also involved in agriculture. For example, in Uganda, many houses get money to support in farming, but people with disabilities are not supported. So I want to call on member states to support us through establishing accessible migration procedures and facilities for disabled travelers. Support migration youth and children platform to include more youth with disabilities in migration processes and policy implementation. So the research, Nothing About Us Without Us principle, include young people with disabilities in research to ensure their meaningful involvement in data collection and decision-making processes. Collaborative research projects involving disabled youth in developing policies, empower youth with disabilities to lead research, particularly in policy reviews, foster a culture of inclusion and representation in decision-making processes. Can you hear us?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Okay, now.
So the last point was to support good practice for people with disabilities. For example, many youth with disabilities have many different business skills, talents. So to make sure you can support these people with disabilities to improve this. This year in January, I went in a global migration forum, and when I reached there, people were surprised to see me there. And to see that people with disabilities can be also involved in higher levels, decisions, discussions. So maybe when people see us, they become happy. So we must make sure that we are involved. Now, training government officials on disability inclusion and accessibility. Enhance their capacity to implement inclusive policies and practices. Workshops and seminars for government officials on disability rights and inclusive governance. Facilitate knowledge exchange to enable cross-border activities and knowledge sharing, especially in Africa. enhance opportunities for education and collaboration among African countries, and also to increase financial and funding opportunities for youth with disabilities, and support entrepreneurship, education, and employment initiatives for disabled youth. For example, I want to see more youth with disabilities from other African countries who can come in Uganda, because we have a problem with cross borders. So I wonder, I see many international students from Nigeria and other countries, but when you look for people with disabilities in those people, they are very few. I wonder if people with disabilities are not interested in going in other countries to learn. No, the problem is our system. We don't have enough opportunity to give young people with disabilities to go and explore in other countries. We must start giving knowledge exchange to see that youth with disabilities in other countries come and explore in other countries. The last is climate education. We can see that we can start in disability inclusive climate change education. We can start some training, like for example, kites designed for people with disabilities, and do more research on how to involve people with disabilities in climate change, because it's a very big issue. And these people also need their fair share. We have many projects for climate change, but very few are given to people with disabilities. So I want this to also be involved.
Thank you, Malenzi, for all the work that you're doing and also for your very clear call to action. Thank you. So we are now moving to the next panelist. And just before we do, I would like to remind all participants that they have the opportunity to ask questions to all the panelists through the Q&A box that is available in Zoom. So turning to our next speaker, Lily Liu. She is from the UNESCO International Institute for Higher Education in Latin America and the Caribbean, and she has been leading consensus making among multi-stakeholders to promote agenda setting and implementation of emerging education priorities, establishing innovative partnerships to support increasing access and quality of higher education, and leading South-South cooperation on strategic higher education planning and financing. And prior to this role, she has worked in policymaking and project management on education, innovation, environmental efficiency, and standardization with a global scope covering all UN regions and hands-on experience in more than 40 countries. She has also managed 1.26 million donation implementations to 8 countries in the global south during the pandemic. Lily, we're so happy to be that you're here. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Lydia. Thank you so much, colleagues. It's really our honor to be here, not just to share what we have done and what we believe to include everyone, but more so to learn from what everyone is saying, especially young people. First and foremost, I think it's very important to highlight that nothing without us. It's really the foundation of the consensus making process of engaging young people meaningfully, especially for young people who actually share identities of equity deserving groups, and more so for young people who actually have this intersectional identity of equity deserving groups. It is really touching for us to see how many people are really dedicated in working with students with disability, and very, very much moved by the fact that from our very last speaker, mentioning our research, not just research on students with disability themselves, but also research on how to find new tools to make education, especially higher education, more accessible for students with disabilities. A couple of points that we would really like to highlight in this nothing without approach is, number one, we cannot achieve anything without being provided with relevant resources. And this applies very much so in the context of working with students and youth with disabilities. It is very, very important that education institutions and higher education institutions should dedicate specific budget to be invested in the higher education of people with disability, finding ways to get them involved, and implementing tools that can actually support with them in the decision-making process. Number two, it is very important that we provide capacity building. And such capacity building is not just for young people or youth or students with disabilities, but also for other stakeholders to understand what are the ways to work with young people with disabilities to better engage them, for them to more accurately express themselves, and to really meaningfully participate once again in decision making. Because whoever we are, young people with, the head of actively deserving groups, we're not just here to receive support as some sort of beneficiary, but we're here to really share what we have been through, what we want to provide to our current and future generation, and work on it together. Third, with this very holistic approach of higher education based within community, within cities, it's really important to not look at education or higher education in a way that it stands by itself. We need to look at the intersectionality of higher education institutions and its inclusive policy with communities, because a lot of times what we have observed or have encountered in terms of providing access does not just take place within the institution. A very simple example is, how can students with disability actually be provided with services like health and transportation in order to even get to higher education? And there are many other factors as well. So it's not just on the infrastructure in the community or in higher education, but also in a way of mentality, in a way of, the work of method to fight against discrimination, to really build this sense of community and safety for everyone to join. And that's what we hope to see along with the work of inclusion. I'll stop right here, and I really want to say congratulations to our very, very dear participants who have gone through so much and have really been taking the way and show the world what can work. And also congratulations to our wider participants who have been working so hard in making inclusion happen for youth and students with disability. And let's work on it together. There's a long way to go, but we have already started, and moving forward, we will do more. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lily, for that call to action from your side. We are now moving to our next panel speaker, Sylvain Obedi. And Sylvain is a passionate young peace builder, disability rights advocate, and a climate justice activist from the Democratic Republic of Congo. He is also the founder and executive director of Enable the Disabled Action, and his advocacy efforts focus on promoting the participation and inclusion of youth with disabilities in all aspects of society. Currently, Sylvain works with International Disability Alliance as the Global Disability Summit Youth Fellow. He actively participated in various networks, including the DGC Civil Society Youth Representatives Steering Committee, Just Future Youth Advocacy Network, the former United Nations Human Rights Youth Advisory Council, Education Above All, and currently the Advisory Council on the Integrity of Youth, led by UNODC. Sylvain, thank you so much for joining, and we're particularly keen to hear from you on what work you've been doing to support the IDA's Youth Committee on their call to action ahead of the Summit of the Future.
Thank you so much, Lydia, for that introduction, and thank you for taking the lead of organizing or being moderating this important session. So I'll be focusing my speech about the call for action, which the youth committee has been working with all youth leaders with disability around the world. And firstly, I'm going to speak about the importance of assistive technologies and digital cooperation, how this can improve young people with disability. And as you know, to promote the full participation of young people with disability as contributor in the science and technology sector will have a positive impact in improving accessibility to the technology. So we call for funding for the research and innovation in technologies designed to address the unique challenge faceted by us as a youth with disability. And also we insist for our full participation. And this is imperative. It must include us from the beginning of project design technology, since just a consultation process can ensure that technology can respond to the demand of persons with disability. And this in accordance with the CRPD Article 4, which spoke about several obligations to start of the state party with regarding to the assistive technology. But also, I'm going to come with speaking about conflict, because I don't know if where you are now, where are you seeing this meeting, but I know there are many young people with disability now who are not feeling the security. I'm coming from Democratic Republic of Congo, and I just turned it 20 years old since the first day of the opening of this forum, and we have been in conflict. Now it's now it is 13 years and have seen people become disabled as a result of the war. Yet much as disabled people are victims of the war and conflict around the world, today we ask as actors that we also have the opportunity to contribute to the peace process and conflict and reconstruction of program, while priorities security in accordance with the Security Council resolution resolution 2475, and also in the line of guidelines of inclusion of persons with disability in humanitarian action, in accordance with CRPD Article 11, and we call for inclusive humanitarian programming and for employment opportunity with humanitarian organization at headquarters and in regional office and at country level to be accessible for young people with disability. But also we know that most of regions around the world are at the least in peace process, but most of parts are really no inclusive process, and we call for manifold participation in conflict resolution and peace process. We are determined to actively participate in conflict resolution and peace effort at local level, national and international level. I engaging in peace dialogue, mediation process, and community reconciliation initiative to promote dialogue, understanding, and reconciliation between parties to the conflict. We are also committed to promoting accessible training for all young people with disability, including those one under representative group, to give them the opportunity to apply this concept are learning, and we recognize that this is essential for them to participate in the manifold way. This includes to explore the navigating politic dynamic. We advocate for the need to improve the participation and employment of young people with disability in UN mechanisms. They need platform. The process that culminated in our call for action is a great example that young people with disability are resolutely engaged and they are determined to make a meaningful contribution in the higher level discussion like climate action, and we emergency call for their inclusion, especially those who are underrepresentative group. And by following this kind of call for action, also which we just come to give there, I think we can arrive to have manifold participation of young people in the summit of the future, and young people with disability can have what to say in the table. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sylvain, for your contribution. And it's wonderful to hear from your perspective as well, coming from the DRC. Our next panelist is Isidora Uribe Silva, and she is a Chilean inclusion activist and a law student at the Pontifical Catholic University of Chile. And at the age of 13, she developed an app to locate accessible parking spaces. She created the Encatura to Lugar Foundation. Sorry for my pronunciation. I'm sure you will be able to correct me in a minute. Connecting people with inclusive spaces and looking to democratize inclusion. She was honored in her country as one of the 100 women leaders 2022 and one of the 100 young leaders in 2023, among others. In 2024, Chile's National Institute for Human Rights recognized Isidora as a woman of influence for promoting disability rights. And she's currently a national gender youth activist, a generation equality adolescent committee member in UN Women, and one of the young leaders for the SDGs, recognized by the UN Youth Office. So Isidora, thank you so much for being here. The floor is yours.
Thank you for that. So today I want to talk to you about not just my vision. I want to invite you to imagine something. Imagine that for years progress is coming, changes are happening, but your reality actually is being forgotten by people. Well, that was something that happens for people with disabilities in Latin America. And that's why I give you this title for my presentation. Because 4 years ago, could you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. 40 years ago, it was unknown how many people with disabilities lived in Latin America and which were our dynamics and realities. Even we had recently a report from the World Bank about disability inclusion in Latin America. And from that, we knew that we were 85 million of people with disabilities living in some way in our region. But our reality is just like shown not very deep in different report and things related to disabilities. Next slide, please. Why? Because disability is shown as something related to the person, something related to barriers with accessibility, with inclusion, but the thing that we haven't shown yet is that disability is something multidimensional. Because when we think in inclusion, we used to think that it's something very far from us, right? Something utopic probably. But the reality is, if we start thinking public policies in a way of inclusive education, inclusive spaces, for example, for entertainment, and that kind of things, finally, people with disability could be included, and also people in general could be considered in their own diversity. Because why inclusion is so important? Because inclusion is the key that give tools for people for having a develop in their own reality. Next slides, please. Thank you. What happened now? We have a lack of opportunities but multiple barriers, and we need to change that reality right now. Why? Well, you could see we in disability just not have the reality of the person. We could have poverty, gender, maybe the context in the region as barriers that are happening for people with disabilities. Because imagine if poverty wasn't a reality, like you can see here in my presentation. People with disabilities could have more opportunities. Because even if we think how to end that cycle, the statistics show us in the report of the World Development Bank that 48.7% of people with disabilities are inactive, or they either can find employment because of their disability. The barriers are still there, but because we doesn't have a change of dynamics in the way that we see disabilities. And even if we want to add gender to the equation, we should see that women with disabilities has less opportunities than men. So you can see in this statistic. Next slide, please. That's why I want to bring with you why intersectionality is important. You should hear that concept in different forums, right? Even here, Lily mentioned it. But why intersectionality is so important? Because it's not just a concept to realize, for example, which barriers are confronting women in different contexts. It's also to start working, seeing how to reduce exclusion because of your context. I am going to explain it better with an example. It's not the same to be a woman with a disabilities indigenous in Latin America than a white woman in the global north. We face both barriers, right? But it's not the same because, as you could see, disability is like something that probably is going to add more barriers to your personal development. Here I bring you a statistic from my country, the National Labor Directorate. We are more women with disabilities in my country, but despite of that, we are less contract in terms of work, inclusion at work. And also the data and the public policies for support women with disabilities are the least in the countries of Latin America. Next slide, please. So I now want to bring you the reality of childhood with disabilities. We are currently, according a report from UNICEF, 19.1 million of childhood with disabilities. And you could see here that it's some statistics related to unhappiness and discrimination. But why? I'm trying to change it. Now, could you move it please to the next slide? Thank you. So you could see here how exclusion is happening. Even in the first steps of our lives, just for having a disability. And even if we want to talk about public policies for stop exclusion and discrimination in these phases of our lives, not all the countries in our region have policies for ensure inclusion of childhood with disabilities at school, and even laws prohibit discrimination against the disability. But I wanted to go away from data and showing something a little bit more material of what is happening with children with disabilities. Next slide, please. Excuse me, next slide. Thank you. So I wanted to share with you my personal experience, because I left scholar exclusion when I was 12 because of my disability. I left bullying from my partners at school, but also the teachers at my school justify these attitudes basing on my personality, or basing in that it was nothing related to sorry, I'm going to express better. If they wanted to help me, or if they wanted to include me, it was something related to that. They were not obligated to provide me, for example, a space in which I can move deeply and independently. So for that experience, and in which I have to go away from that school and stay at my home 6 months, waiting for a school that could accept me, here I'm not. Here I am, my new school, my third school. I decided to change my reality. I wanted to show you, I wanted to show you something different about what can we do with our own reality. Next slide, please. I said, okay, if people is not going to change alone, I'm going to try to show them why it's important to start working for inclusion. Because inclusion is for everybody. And that's why I developed Encuentra tu lugar. La Fundación Encuentra tu lugar, or Find Your Place Foundation. I try to translate it for you English speakers. So I developed Encuentra tu lugar as a tool for people basing on the SDGs to democratize inclusion, but also as a technological tool. You here can find our webpage, in which you should find inclusive places. But also, I think that the most important thing, inclusive places in education, in university, in work, in entertainment, your rights, or even with the parking lot application. But I think that's the most important thing of Encuentra tu lugar. It's not just to try to develop these SDGs or the objective of the project related to find places for people with disabilities. The most important thing, next slide, please, was that I try to empower people, because I know, or we know as people with disabilities, that we are facing problems, right? We are facing discrimination. Some of you have mentioned it before on your interventions. But what is important? It's important to make believe to other people that they are part of the change. You are part of the change, people without disabilities too. You need to be the key for change our future, for made an inclusive environment for all, in which anybody is discriminated for their context, for their own reality. And that's why I create the concept of inclusive agents, or agentes inclusivos in Spanish, because I wanted to make people believe in their empowerment, yes, and to start making change with them. With these volunteers and other people that's not present here, nothing of what Encuentra tu lugar is could be possible. So that's why I wanted to show you today how we have to believe in civil society for a change, and maybe your bad experiences could be the key to make a change in your community. We are now currently more than 40 volunteers around all my country. Thank you so much, and I really hope that for the Summit of the Future, we have inclusion as a key, but really, not just in words or in a document, in actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Isadora, and I'm so happy to see that. I think you're not alone in this hope, but we're all here together supporting your message. So thank you so much. We are now moving to have some questions from the participants. And we have a lot of questions coming in and not as much time as we were hoping for. So we're going to ask the panelists to keep their responses to the questions around 30 seconds. So my first question that I received from one of the participants is addressed, I will ask to Malenzi. So Molenzi, if you're ready to provide an answer on that, I will read the question out to you now. So the question that I received is, do you have advice on what participants who have a youth organization in their country can do to include the perspectives of young people with disabilities within that youth organization? So Molenzi, do you have any thoughts on that or any advice?
Molenzi's not popped his video on just yet, so you might want to move on to the next question, Lydia. Oh,
Yeah,
look, just coming
wonderful.
on, I think, just
Oh,
coming
just
on.
here.
Really.
Great. I think the sound is still off, Molenzi, so if you can unmute yourself, then we'll be able to hear your interpreter. So now the video is off as well. So let's see if we can move to the second question first and then come back to you, Melenzi, just so we can sort out the technical issue here. I just have a second question from one of the participants that I would like to ask to Lily, who is still going to be here for a few minutes, I believe. So I hope you're still here, Lily.
I am.
So the question, wonderful. So the question that was asked is, what kind of opportunities are available for disabled students to help them access higher education? Could you share some thoughts on that?
Sure, wonderful. Thank you so much. I think one of a very important factor that we need to consider is the digital transformation of higher education and the emerging technologies, including AI, ChatGPT, and explore further on how those tools can possibly facilitate with providing access to students with disability, as well as improving the quality of education. I'll use another 15 seconds to give a very quick example for one of the workshops we hosted last year in Arab State, where with the content being created in the context of virtual reality, a student who actually struggles with really focusing and also experiencing autism can actually, with the tool of VR, better focus on the learning process and enhancing the learning outcome. Stop right here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you so much for keeping it short as well. So from what I just heard from my support team, Melenza will be typing his answer to that first question that I mentioned just now. And just for the other speakers, because we're so tight on time and we would like to move to our final speaker of the event, we would like to suggest that we approach the speakers to give their answers and to publish that online, so you can see the answers to their questions through the website of Sightsavers and International Disability Alliance. So I'm so sorry to end the panel discussion already here, because there's so much to discuss and so much to dive into further together. But just to make sure that we have enough time to hear from our final closing speaker, I propose that we move to her now. So our final speaker of this event is Abia Akram, and she's a Sightsavers trustee, the global campaign ambassador of the Equal World Campaign, and disability rights activist. Abia has been involved in the disability rights movement since 1997, ensuring that women and girls' voices are heard. And she's been instrumental in leading the disability youth and women's movement in Pakistan and the Asia Pacific region more widely. And in 2021, she was celebrated as one of the BBC Top 100 Women. And she's a formidable force, holds many roles in the disability rights sector, both in Pakistan and globally. We're so honored to have you here, and we'd really appreciate to hear your concluding remarks. To summarize the discussion from the several panelists we've heard today, as concisely as you can in the few minutes that we have left. So happy to have you here, Abia.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lydia, for having me. And thanks to the Sightsavers and International Disability Alliance for organizing this very important talk on the Nothing Without Us. So we are just changing the whole concept of the global implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, that it is important to include young people with disabilities, and why it's important to have their future summit and the engagement of the young people. Thank you very much. I'm really honored and wonderful to hear all the voices of the young people today. I'm Abia Akram, as you mentioned, like I'm also the trustee for the Site Savers and the Equal World Campaign, global ambassador, and I would like to thank formally on behalf of the organizers to all of our participants who have joined us today and shared, and they believe that young people with disabilities must have a say in their future at the Summit of the Future. I would just take a few minutes. I know all of you have made interventions that was so important. Just amazing to hear from some of you about the roles they have played as young athletes and showed what is possible with inclusion and how that can inspire societal change, both in their communities and on the global stage. I also read inputs around negative narrative shows us why it is important that space is made for young people with disabilities and other protected characteristics. The SDGs cannot leave anyone behind. And we have a role as leaders in the movement to ensure we share our platform when we get to those spaces. And I also feel like it was important, and I echoed the point which was made by Lily's about the learning from young people is so important too. And I'm glad we have had this chance to hear from you all today as we continue to fight for the space within these important processes. We cannot achieve this without resources and budget. Must be committed to the including of the young people in the decision making processes. And I would say at the ECOSOC Youth Forum enters its discussion into the summit today, I urge them to consider how no one will be left behind and what steps they will take to ensure young people with disabilities have some ownership over their future. It's not always to guide them or instruct them, but to hear from them, from their lived experiences, and to learn from them is critically important. To create a world where no one is left behind, member states need to listen and consult with young people, including young people with disabilities, with diverse disabilities, from diversified of the geographical presence, and also with all their intersectionality and diversity of the disabilities. The principle of nothing about us without us is the key to inclusive, sustainable development successes. And the calls to action raised today give clear guidance on how the voices of these young people with disabilities can be heard. And I'm really hopeful these consultations will go further into the discussions and the member states will give the key priority to the voices of young people with disability. I again thank you all for your contributions and the wonderful interventions and the vision for the future for the summit. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Abia, for your concluding remarks. And we are closing the webinar here, but we're not closing the conversation on the inclusion of young people with disabilities. So thank you again so much for our panelists and also for the participants for your active engagement with the topic of inclusion of young people with disabilities and on Nothing Without Us. We are looking forward to continue with this conversation with you throughout the ECOSOC Youth Forum and also in any other platform. I hope you have a wonderful time and thank you so much for your participation here.